Okay. Well, obviously, you've already clicked on the video, so you know what it's pertaining to. And so you know I'm wading into some, I don't know, culturally dangerous waters, so to speak. But that just means I need to rely on the word, and I need to handle it correctly. I need to divide it correctly. So, that said, I would like to make an appeal, please. This is a polarizing sort of issue. And so I would just like for you to hear me out. Don't get, I say that because I'm going to make several points. And if you get 3 or 4 minutes into this video, you may think you know where I'm going. And I would just ask that if you clicked on the video to hear what I have to say or hear what I'm going to bring out from the Bible, because I'm going to try to avoid any opinions on my part. I really am. So if you'll just go with me to the Bible and see what it has to say and stick with me to the end, I would be very glad to answer any further objections, opinions, questions that you have on this subject. Let me start off by saying I don't care. I don't have... I've examined myself on this issue because it is so polarizing. And would I be okay, for instance, if I thought, or if my interpretation, or if the Bible led me to believe that God wanted women pastors and that I need to be submissive to hearing from a woman in the pulpit? Absolutely. Absolutely. I have a lot of respect for my wife, and she has done a lot of Bible study. And when she says something to me about a sermon, I went. In fact, one of the first people I go to after preaching is I go to my wife, and I'm like, "All right, any red flags? Did I say anything that could have been taken out of context? Did I say anything that was against something you've read somewhere?" And a lot of times, even I'll preach. I'll practice my sermon in front of her before I go, just to make sure, because she is so biblically wise. I don't have a problem. To be honest, I wouldn't even have a problem if a woman was godly, appointed head of the household. It'd be a lot less stress for me, or at least I think it would be. I'm just saying that it's not a personal thing with me. And it doesn't bother me. It doesn't offend my masculinity to think that there would be a prophetess or a woman pastor or a senior pastor. But I do need to figure out what this passage means. I do need to submit to the word just like my wife does, just like you do. We need to submit to what God has told us to do. And what is that exactly? So with that said, let's go. Let's look at it. The question today is, should women be silent in church? This comes from 1 Corinthians 14:34. Let your women keep silent in churches. Now, if you were to stop right there, and if you were to take that passage alone, then absolutely women should, whenever there is a gathering of Christians, be quiet and not say a single word. But is that what this passage means? Remember, Paul wasn't coming from our culture. He wasn't worried about offending anyone, nor should he. He was merely writing what was inspired by the Holy Spirit. And it is just as important today as it was then. But your first thing that you should think about when you read this is not, oh, Paul was a chauvinist, or the Bible's written by men to keep women down. No. We should all, men and women, say, wait a minute. When I take this in context of the Bible, am I understanding this passage correctly? Because is Paul saying here, for instance, that it's morally wrong for a woman to speak, to talk, to utter a single word in any gathering of Christian believers? That does not hold true when we read the Bible. And we're going to go to some of those passages in just a minute. Is it morally wrong for a woman to lead worship? The second worship leader ever after Moses to the people of Israel was Miriam. Is it ever wrong for a woman to have authority over a man? For instance, at work, should you quit your job if your woman is a boss on Christian principle? And we have to bring up, forgotten her name. I've got it written down over here. A woman who was Hula, H-U-L-A-H. And she was over many men, telling them what to do as they rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. Is it wrong for women to make spiritual judgments ever? Is that morally wrong? I mean, we have to bring up Deborah. Deborah was anointed from God as a judge to make decisions. She sat in the gate and she made decisions. So we have to understand that just like when Jesus said that, hey, tear down this temple and I'll rebuild it in 3 days, or if you destroy this temple, I'll rebuild it in 3 days. They thought he meant the temple. You know, they assumed he meant the temple that they were standing in front of. In fact, one of the charges against him, or the main charge against him, when they arrested him, was he threatened to destroy the temple. And he didn't. He didn't threaten to destroy. He was talking about his body, but he wasn't even. But if you read him, he didn't even threaten to destroy his own body. He says, "If you destroy it, I'll rebuild it in 3 days." But he wasn't talking about the temple in Jerusalem, the physical stone and mortar temple. He was talking about his body. So you can't just take a passage and say, this is what it means just by itself. That's taking a passage out of context and then translating it into our culture and our way of thinking. We need to go and look at this passage and see what it means, because we must hold to it. We are still bound by this passage. And I'm not trying to get out of it. I'm not trying to say it doesn't apply to us anymore. I'm not trying to say it doesn't belong in the Bible, or that we shouldn't, or that it's not important. We just need to understand it in the context of the Bible. Now, let me go back to where I was. I want to be very careful. I've already recorded this video once, and I was very unhappy with the way it turned out. So I want to get it right this time. So I'm going to pace myself and get everything lined out kind of correctly. We shouldn't ignore this passage. We shouldn't try to remove it from our Bibles or try to come up with some excuse of why it was added. No, we need to obey the word of the Lord. And if this passage means that women should be silent in churches, then women should be silent in churches. And it does mean that. That's what it says. But let's look at what this really says. Not in our culture, in English, and what we might interpret it to mean, but what it really meant and what Paul meant by it. First of all, we need to look in the context of we've already looked in the context of the Bible and saw that it can't mean that it's morally wrong for a woman to ever have an utterance in church. And we can even look, and of course my references were the Old Testament, we can look in the New Testament. We can look in Acts 21:9, where we see women prophesying. We see young women prophesying. We can look in 1 Corinthians 11:5, and we see women prophesying. What is really being said here is what I'm saying. Not what we want it to say, whether we're a man who wants women to be quiet in church or whether we're a woman who wants to preach. We need to both look at this passage and say, what is it saying? We need to go by what it says, not what we want. Okay? So let's look at it. Let's break it down. First of all, let your women. Women is, that word there in Greek, women, it means wives. It's a general term for women. It's translated correctly, but it's wives. It's married women, and you can even see that in the context of the rest of the passage, because it says, let them ask their own husbands. Okay. Next, it says they are to be let me back up. Let me go in order here. Women. This is married women. Keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak. That word "speak" does not mean talk. It doesn't mean conversate. It has a specific meaning, and the Greek is a lot more specific than English, and they rendered it correctly in English, speak, as in a speech, as in preach. If you look up that word in any Greek dictionary, the word means to speak as in preaching. Now, why didn't they use the word preach there? Because it's a little broader than that, okay? But it does mean to speak in a way that addresses the congregation. Okay, it means, and so that's important. Next, but they are to be submissive. Now, this is translated in some versions of the Bible, maybe a little more accurately, but it means they should subject themselves. This they are to be submissive means that's an internal command. That means they are to submit themselves. Okay, so in fact, if you look at all the passages in the New Testament, go to Ephesians 5 and read that, and read in Colossians where it talks about husbands and wives, it never tells the husband to subject their wives to them. It's always a commandment to the wives to be submissive. It's always a commandment to the wives to submit themselves to their husbands. Okay, so I just want to make that clear. Okay, this isn't about men lording over women or trying to keep them submissive. This is a commandment to women to be submissive. All right, and it is here as well. And then the next passage says, as the law also says. Now, is there a law that says women shouldn't speak in church? No. What law is he referring to? He's referring to the law of order. The law of order of a wife being submissive to her husband, subject to. And let me stop here and talk about the word submissive, because it is not an anti-feminist word. I don't like the word feminist either, because it has so many connotations, but it's not about being a weak woman. Can I put it that way? Being submissive is not about being a weak woman. In fact, the biblical mandate for women, and if you read Proverbs 31, it actually says she is strong and she rules her household and she invests and she makes profit for the family and she does all these. I mean, she's an entrepreneur in Proverbs. Okay. It's not about being a weak woman. It's about being orderly. The family has a specific order by God, and that is children, wives, husband, Christ. Okay? As a husband, I'm to be submissive as well. Submissive to Christ and to the Word of God. And that is also a mandate here in this passage. Now, this is not the only person, by the way, he's not picking on women here. If I go back up just a little ways, I think there's 3 different people in this passage, in this chapter, that he tells to be silent. If you're speaking in tongues and there's nobody there to translate it, or somebody else is talking, somebody else has the floor, somebody else is preaching, be silent. It's better to not have the tongue at all than it to be not translated or to cause disorder. Second, if somebody's prophesying, that usually only one person prophesying at a time so that it can be checked to see if it matches Scripture. So there's 3 people told here to be silent, and only one of them is the women. Okay. And this whole passage is about order in the church. Now, let me give you some cultural context. This doesn't dismiss the passage. We still gotta swallow the pill of the passage. But let me give you some context. This is a very he wasn't fighting feminism in this time, or he wasn't addressing feminism in this time. But what the church was dealing with in this time is Hellenistic behavior. And what they would do is the Hellenistic church and church gatherings, they weren't called churches, but when they would gather together to worship the gods, plural, they would get drunk and they would start to prophesy, or they would start to just blurt out things, whatever came into their mind. That was sort of the goal, was to get so drunk that you lost your own thoughts and you would just blurt out whatever. And they all were blurting out all these things all at the same time. And then you were supposed to go away from that experience with some kind of, snippets of truth that you could apply to your life. I always put it like this. It's like taking, it's bad and bad. It's like taking your horoscope and then just putting it in a blender and then just, and then trying to apply, each little piece to your life. That was sort of their worship experience. And so he is contrasting that with Christian worship, with true godly worship. These people that he's addressing here in Corinthians are not people who are primarily Jews, who come out of a very orderly liturgy. These are people who are coming out of a chaotic liturgy. And so he is stressing that even though they don't have to be Jewish, that God still is a God of order and not a God of confusion. And he even makes that point. It says that. But that we would be, that it would be a very orderly. So in that order, we still have to address this, be silent. Okay, let your women keep silent in the churches. Now let's look at these other passages, because a lot of people bring up Acts 21:9. Now this is Philip's daughters, and they were prophesying. But keep in mind that these women, first of all, they weren't married women. They were under the authority of their father. Okay, they have to. So we look in another passage in where is it? In Timothy, and we'll look at it in a minute. But it talks about having a covering. And women prophesying should have a covering. In other words, they should be under the authority of their husbands, or they should be under the authority of their father. Or if they don't have either of those, they should be under the authority of the elders or the pastor. Okay, so they still should be submissive. Okay, now again in Acts 21:9, this example is not people prophesying within the church, within a church gathering. Okay, and again, keep in mind that the word churches, where it says be silent in the churches in verse 34, it's not talking about the church buildings, because that's not what that word there means. The churches was the gatherings. So he says, that's what that word literally means, congregation or gathering of Christians. So let your women keep silent in the gatherings. Now, but it is sort of a formal. It's not like just two Christians meeting on the street and all of a sudden a woman's got to shut up. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about a formal gathering where we're reading the doctrine, where we're taking communion, where we're worshiping and singing songs and hymns and those kinds of things, that there needs to be order. Okay, so back to this. Let a woman keep silent in churches, for they are not permitted to speak. That word speak there, again, is preach, or contest. It includes the contesting of things. And that sort of becomes clear as you continue to read the passage. But they are to be submissive, as the law says. Again, the law of order of the family, husband, then wives. And if they want to learn something, let them ask their own husbands at home. So here a couple of things become clear. One, women are supposed to learn. They're supposed to ask questions. It's okay. It's not forbidden for women to ask questions. It's not forbidden for women to learn. It's not. They're not just supposed to, stay home and barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. That's not what this is saying. This is saying let them learn in an orderly way, and that their husbands then should maintain that position of spiritual leadership in the family. Because if they go off and ask a question without consulting their husband, then they know the answer to the question, and their husband doesn't. And so to maintain order in the family and that spiritual order of leadership in the family, this is sort of a challenge to husbands. Like, go home and ask your husband. And if he doesn't know, then let him, right? And the idea there is that he will know, or that he will then go ask the pastor or elders and pursue it and get an answer for his family, maintaining him as the leader of the family. It would be the same thing as, this is a perfect example. It would be the same thing if one of my congregation has a question about something that I said, and they go off and Google it and go off and talk to two other pastors at two other different churches about it, and then never come to me. And they know, and maybe I made a mistake, and I never know that there was a passage I didn't consider, or I made a statement and I took a passage out of context, or something like that. No, if they're going to maintain me as a pastor, if then I need to be held accountable, and that accountability needs to come from the elders and the congregation, and maybe even through the deacons. But they need to be pursuing that up the chain, so that it gets addressed with me, so that I can maintain my leadership as their pastor, the spiritual leadership of the pastor. Otherwise, they're just undermining me as a spiritual leadership, and I never even know about it. So then everything I say, they're going to go question, because I'm not addressing it or having it addressed or getting any smarter as far as what they're challenging me on. So it's the same sort of order. It's there for a reason. Okay, so let's go back to the passage now. go home and ask their husbands, for it is shameful for a woman to speak in church. Now, again, this word woman there, this is like, all of these words are like trigger words for how women are raised today with, and it shouldn't be that way. For it is shameful for a woman to speak in church. Again, translate that as married women speaking out of turn without consulting their husbands and holding them accountable to be the leaders of the family. Okay? So that's all in there. Okay? And, this little paragraph, verses 34 and 35, are not alone. They're within the context of a passage that is talking about order within a church, and they are within the context of the Bible that speaks to the value of women and how important women are in the ministry. I mean, you have the example of Phoebe and Aquila, and I've forgotten the example now. They were husband and wife. Phoebe and Aquila, is that right? And they corrected, and I forgot the other guy's name too. I've forgotten everybody's name. There's a guy who was wrong. He only knew the baptism of John, the baptism of repentance. He hadn't heard about the baptism of the Spirit. He hadn't heard about Christ's death and resurrection. And so they are together as husband and wife correcting him. Now, why is that important? Because it was a wife helping the husband correct the situation within the authority of her husband, correcting another man. That is just a perfect example. Now, she's not standing up in front of the church, correcting the church by herself. She is addressing an individual, and she's doing it with her husband's approval, authority over her, addressing him and doing it with him, helping him. That's which is the role. Now, if you automatically think that it is just wrong, that there are different roles for husbands and wives, for women and for men within the church, then yeah, you're going to be offended, and you can click off the video now, because that's not what the Bible teaches, and we can be done. I mean, you're going your own way versus the Bible way, because there are different roles. Women are to be wives and men are to be husbands. Women are to be submissive to men. Those are the roles, and a man's to be submissive to Christ. And a man is supposed to protect and provide for his wife, and a wife is supposed to respect and love and help her husband. So we have different roles that are clearly defined in the Bible, and if that's a problem, then yeah, then we're going to have to agree to separate, because I'm going to follow the Bible, not what culture wants me to do. I have a wife and a daughter and no sons, and so and I love them dearly, and I want the best for them, and I want God's best for them, and so that's why I take this seriously. All right. And they're both strong women, by the way. And I'm proud of them for that. We do have some other passages we need to address. So Joel 2:28, I think it's repeated in Acts, that in the last days your sons and daughters will prophesy. That passage, that again, sons and daughters, is not talking about married wives, and it's not talking about preaching. Okay, prophesying is declaring the word of the Lord. Women, yes, you're supposed to share the gospel. We're all commanded to share the gospel. We're all commanded to share the word of the Lord and to preach the word of the Lord to everyone around us, but not out of order. Does that make sense? You wouldn't correct your husband in front of somebody, in that way. You would go to him separately and say, "Hey, I don't think you were right in this." Oh my gosh, yeah, sure. Unless he gives you permission to, Lord, like, honey, correct me if I'm wrong here, but blah, 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 blah. Well, I wouldn't say it that way. I'd say it this way. Okay, but that's still within the authority of the husband. It's just order, and it's not order based on value. Keep in mind that this commandment to be submissive, wherever it occurs in the Bible, is a military term. So just like it's not, and I don't think anybody would think it would be wrong for a lieutenant to obey a major, for a lieutenant to be submissive to a major, or a major to be submissive to I don't know my military ranks very well, a general, for instance, you would. Nobody would argue with that. That doesn't. But when it comes to personal things within the family between men and women, some people have a problem with that, and some people have a problem with it because the men aren't doing what they're supposed to do. I want to make another point. And that is, it is not sin for a woman to preach. Hear me on this. Nowhere in the Bible does it say it's a sin for women to preach. Just like it's not a sin for a rock to worship Jesus. But it's about what the roles are. When they were worshiping Jesus as he was coming into Jerusalem, and he said, tell them to stop worshiping you. He says, if they didn't worship me, the rocks themselves would break out in praise, right? It's not the rock's role to do that. It was the people's role to do that. And if they didn't do it, then the rocks would take it over. And I think that's the same way in our churches. I think it's the same way in our spiritual life at home. If the man doesn't step up and take the spiritual role, then God's going to allow the woman to do that for the sake of the family. It doesn't mean it's his perfect order, and it shouldn't be that way. But it's not a sin for her to teach her children the Bible if the husband fails in his role to do that. I think that's very clear in the Bible itself. So, in Paul's instructions to a woman who is unequally yoked or married to an unbeliever. But I think we can apply that to even a believer who is not taking his role as a husband seriously. That, if you walk into a house and the woman is the spiritual leader of that house, it's not her sin. It's his. It's the husband's sin. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, if he tries to step up and she doesn't want to step back, then we're talking about the sin of the wife. But same way in a church. I think if you walk into a church and there's a woman pastor, that's not the sin of that woman who's up there preaching. It's the sin of the men in that church that didn't step up and fill that role. I hope that's clear. And that's based on what you read in the Bible. There's no place in the Bible that says it's a sin to do that. That's why you have these people in the Old Testament doing it. I don't know that there was a man that should have stepped into Deborah's role or should have been there to take over for Miriam worshiping. I don't know. I wasn't there. The Bible's not clear there. But it certainly doesn't address that as sin. Sin doesn't change from the Old Testament to the New Testament. Sin is always sin. And so a woman preaching is not a sin on that woman, but it is out of order in the role. Now, let's address, let me go a little further. Before I go any further, I did want to make a point about this speech. Because it is a specific type of speech listed here, both here and in Timothy 2:8. It's the same word. It means to question. It means it's a questioning. It's an addressing of the assembly. It's a public type of word for speak. It doesn't mean, let me be very clear here, it doesn't mean, and this has been abused, that the woman should not speak up when there's abuse, when there's sin, when she's being taken advantage of, when she's being put in uncomfortable positions, as far as her role in the church, that she shouldn't speak up and question what is happening or question men's behavior in the church that is inappropriate. Women should speak out about that to their husbands, to their fathers, to the deacons, and to the police. Okay? Yes, you should speak out to every authority when a man is abusing his position or, anyone. If you see it happening, it should be spoken about. There shouldn't be this realm of silence within the church. And we can go no further to say that, hey, those who do evil hate the light because they want to keep because their deeds are evil, right? I have that passage right here. Somewhere. Yeah, here it is. I can find it. I promise it's here. Nope. Here we go. All right, it's John 3. It's actually right after John 3:16. And this is the condemnation. He says the world is condemned, and this is the condemnation, that the light is coming in the world, and men love the darkness rather than the light because their deeds are evil. It goes on from there, actually, to say, I can pull it up here for you. For everyone practicing evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But he who does the truth comes to the light, so that his deeds may be clearly seen. If you're questioned on something that you're doing because it may be inappropriate, let's say you got caught, you walked out of a room and somebody walked by and saw you walk out of a room, open a door and walk out of a room with no windows. And in that room, as they saw you walk out, there was a woman in there. Okay, and they call you and question you on that. Then as a man, regardless of how that happened, what circumstances took place to allow that to happen, then you need to you need to run to the light. You know, hey, whoa, nothing happened in there. Let's get her out here. Let's talk about it. I was in there, somebody was in there with us and they just walked out and closed the door. Or I was in there by myself and she walked in and closed the door and I left. All right. So, call it to the light, get it in the light right away, because if there's nothing wrong, then you won't be scared of the light. And so when women, so I just say that to say that this passage has been used in recent years, which is just shameful and embarrassing, especially I've seen, within the Southern Baptist Convention, or been used to try to tell women that they shouldn't be speaking up. That is an abuse itself. This has nothing to do with that kind of speaking. Okay, this is about literally addressing the congregation and preaching. Okay, and it's about order, not about speaking at all. Okay. Again, this same kind of, let me go back to that just to show you that in the scripture. Let me pull that back up. Because he says, don't speak in the church, but speak to your husband. So it's not that she shouldn't speak at all. It's that she should address it in a proper order. Okay. All right. I think we've covered that to death. Now let's go to, I want to touch on 2 Timothy 2:8, because this one also sort of mimics the same thing, but it's addressing a different circumstance, and it's worded a little differently. And so let's take a look at that, because it's also used in the same context whenever this discussion comes up. It says, I desire, therefore, that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands, without wrath and doubting, in a like manner also, that women adorn themselves in a modest apparel. Now, here he's addressing how they are dressed. He says, modest apparel, not with braided hair or gold or pearl or costly clothing, but which is proper for women professing godliness and good works. Now, there are even entire denominations that take this to the point where it's forbidden for a woman to braid her hair or to wear any type of fancy clothing to church. And I think you're missing his point here, because he makes it very, very clear, in a like manner. Okay, so he's saying, in a like manner to what? In a like manner to men praying all the time and lifting up their holy hands without wrath and doubting. In a like manner, let women. In other words, he's saying, don't be showy. He's saying, pray constantly with humility to God. Okay, and not putting on pride or being too manly to worship the Lord. No, you're going to worship the Lord. And so in a like manner, women shouldn't be too feminine, too concerned with their appearance, that they wouldn't worship the Lord as well. This is about praying. Okay, that's what he says. But it's also, that doesn't excuse the fact that women should dress modestly in church, because they don't want to be a distraction. God doesn't want them to be a distraction. You shouldn't be a distraction in church, or dress too provocatively in church. Okay, that it distracts men or tempts men. Okay, you want to dress modestly, but you look nice. And gold and pearls are not what they were. Okay, gold and pearls now are not what they were in this culture. So it's just different, and it's not a sin for women to braid their hair or wear a nice dress or even an expensive dress, or gold or pearls or jewelry. Okay, because it doesn't have the same context as it did then, where it would call attention, it would tempt men, and it was calling attention to themselves. Okay, now we get to the important part of verses, which is verse 11. Let a woman learn in silence with all submission, and I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man. And here we get to that same word. It doesn't mean teach anyone, because he specifically tells women to teach the younger women. He specifically is talking to older women and widows that they should teach the younger women and guide them along. So he's not talking about ever teach. He's talking about within a certain context. And that is qualified here by showing it to have authority over a man. So she shouldn't be teaching in a context that is having authority over a man. Okay? That's it. All right? Now, does that mean a man can't learn something from a woman? Absolutely not. That is not what this is saying. I learned a lot from my wife. And I, the Lord shows her something, or she's studying in Philippians and I'm studying in Romans, and I'm getting ready for a sermon. She brings something up out of Philippians and I learned something. I'm like, oh, that's great. There's nothing, that's not sinful. But for her to usurp my authority, that would be, is what he's talking about here. That would be wrong. Okay. That would be to exercise that authority over a man. Okay. He's talking about order. It would be the same thing as if you were talking about two men who were in the military and, or at work somewhere, and he skips and he goes to the boss. He's like, oh, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm going to go to your boss and talk to him. You wouldn't. So instead of going to your boss, you go to his boss. And of course, we all know that causes problems, and that's wrong because it's out of order. Okay. And there are certain situations you would need to do that if your boss was being inappropriate but I'm just saying that in general, the order needs to remain. And that's what he's talking about here within the church, that there is a specific order. And I think this also does speak to women being pastors or senior pastors or holding a position of teaching from the pulpit. I think that within the context maybe of a Sunday school in a small room where it's a husband and wife, then I think that, I would make this, I'm giving to my opinion. Okay. So this is my opinion. I would think that would be okay because she's under the authority of her husband. She has, and we're going to talk about covering because he goes into, is that here? He goes into covering? No. It's a little further on. Okay. Okay. So, but there is a passage, and I don't remember where that was, that talks about covering. It doesn't matter. The point is that she was under the authority of her husband, or covering. Okay. And so within that context of a couples class, she might say something from her experience. But again, we're usually talking about older women or more spiritually mature women guiding and directing less spiritually mature women. If you were having a men's class, and then a woman was going to come in and teach something to the men, that would probably be not under this guideline. Okay, I think that would go against what this is trying to teach us about the order of the church. But again, we're talking about order of the church and what the roles are. We're not talking about sin, and we're not talking about, if a woman teaches a man something, she's going to go to hell, or it's a sin she needs to repent from. We're talking about order within the church. Okay. So I do not permit a woman to teach and have authority over a man, but to be in silence. And then he goes on from there. And then we get to the, I'll pull this up. 1 Timothy 1:15. Here we go. I don't think that's right. That's not the passage I was going to. Maybe it's 2 Timothy. Let me see. I think I wrote down the wrong passage. No. Huh. I do not know. 1 Timothy 2:15, maybe? Nope. I don't know where that was. I wanted to bring that up, but I do. So I wanted to get to the last point, which I can't find it, so I don't know what I'm going to do. But I wanted to get to this last point. We can go to this other scripture here, 1 Peter 5:2. Should a woman ever be a senior pastor? I think I've answered that question already. But when we talk about pastors, we're talking about an elder. There's two offices within the church: elder and deacon. And the qualifications for those are listed. Okay, those are the two offices of the church. Those are two roles within the church that we can serve in. Now, deacon means servant. And it's to look after people, to look after the flock, to make sure they have plenty to eat, to make sure they have a place to stay. If there's a need that the church can fill, then it's the deacon's role to sort of oversee that and look after that. And it talks about the qualification for a deacon is a man. Okay, it's a man. But there's also deaconesses. Okay, that means people who are serving as women. And it even talks about that role being filled by a woman if the woman is a widow over 60. It just means an older widow who's not likely to remarry. In fact, he makes that clear within that context, that I can't find. But he's saying that that a widow that is not going to remarry then can serve as a deacon. But a woman who still is within childbearing years and still might want to marry, then let her focus on that. And not worry about being a deaconess. Also, deaconesses are listed as wives. So if your husband is a deacon, you're a deaconess. Okay, but elders are not talked about the same way. Elders have a little higher, and there's only one qualification difference between a deacon and an elder. You know what it is? Teaching. And what's the one thing a woman not supposed to do? Teach. Teach within the assembly. Preach. In other words, preach to the general assembly of the gathering of the body. She can teach in certain circumstances, but not from the pulpit as senior pastor, as elder. Okay, so she's not to teach as an elder. So whoever is teaching as an elder is held accountable by the other elders, and if there's only one elder, then by the congregation and deacons. And they're supposed to test what he's saying to make sure that it's lining up with Scripture. So yes, I do think that nowhere in the Bible is an elder listed as a female. Nowhere in the Bible is anyone called to be a female elder, and the only qualifications for elder is man. And that is in 1 Timothy. I think. Oh, it says also in Titus. Maybe it's I don't know. Overseers and elders, right here. Overseer qualifications for deacons, right there. And then let's see. Maybe I guess it's Titus where the qualifications for elders are listed. That's a whole other show. But I just wanted to say that no, a woman shouldn't serve as senior pastor because the senior pastor is an elder, and elders, that role is to be filled by men. All right. I hope that helps to qualify. Hope that helps to answer that question. I know it was a long video. I thought about breaking it into two, but then I just wanted to get it all out and all in one place, so that because all these scriptures link together. I'm really curious about that passage because it is the passage that is it this passage, and am I just a shepherd of the flock of God is overseers? It's where Timothy talks about the qualifications of an elder. I don't know why it's not here. Oh, here we go. 3. I guess it's supposed to be 3. But it's not 3:15. Well, anyway, so we have 1 Timothy 3, if you're still with me, is where the qualifications for overseers is listed. Now here we have the word bishop used, and we have 3 words for pastor, three words for elder, or 3 words for pastor, 3 words that are used in the Bible interchangeably. Overseer, bishop, and elder. Overseer, bishop, and elder. And the word pastor is sort of a popular word to use today for senior pastor instead of reverend or these other just words that people use for the leader of the church. But ultimately, whether it's a reverend, whether it's a bishop, whether it's an overseer, whether it's a head elder, whatever you call him, that's what he is. He's the lead elder of the church. And there's only a qualification for a church to have one elder. But most churches, as they grow, need more elders. And as a senior pastor, I value my elders. They hold me accountable. They help me do my job, and especially make financial decisions that I don't want to be involved in. And so they can be very helpful to a pastor. And as your church grows, if you're over 30, if you've got more than 30 people in your church, then you should be looking for those who can be elders and probably pulling from your deacons to do that, because the qualifications are the same except for teaching. So you're looking for deacons that can teach. Now, my goal, my role, or the way I think about it, is that everybody in the church should be a deacon. My goal is to make everybody in my church, every member of my church should eventually become a deacon. Okay, because it means to serve. And the qualifications for a deacon can be met by any Christian. Okay, so either a widow or a single woman who becomes to an age where she's not going to remarry, then she can become a deacon and serve other women and serve other single women and other widows. I wouldn't put a deaconess, even a widow, over men. Now, again, it's a servant position, so they're serving. They're not, but people don't look at it that way in our culture. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a woman deacon over and having her assign her some families with men in them. But the problem with that is how it's perceived by those families in our culture today. So because it's perceived as she was over them, then I wouldn't. But she's serving them is the point. And as long as everybody's treating the deaconship the way it should be as servants, then there's really no biblical issue with that. But because of our culture, I don't do it. The women have the senior women in my church who are deaconesses. They serve the women. They serve other widows. They serve single women, and that's just the way it is. Once they're married, but become married, then I move them under a different deacon. But my goal is to get them to all serve as deacons, and we just have certain ones that are active and certain ones that are inactive, and get everybody in those roles, and so we have inactive and active deacons. Then I can pull from that to have elders. And should you have an entire church full of elders? I think that every man in your church should aspire to be an elder. It says here that to aspire to be an elder is a good thing. And I think that is good. But if you have an entire church of elders, then I think you're talking about a dead church, because now you don't have anybody to disciple. And I really think that at that point you need, if you're starting to have more elders in your church, you've got lots of people who can serve as elders. You need to be bringing in some new families. That's just for the health of the church. But I've gone way too long. I'm at almost 50 minutes. So this is one of those topics that just keeps going, and I guess I'm feeling a little wordy today. I apologize for that. Well, anyway, I hope this was helpful. I hope it helped you think through things scripturally. I'll talk to you send your questions to Pastor Brad at brightstar.church. If I'm not answering the questions you want to ask, then why don't you ask me? I'll try to answer them, and I'll see what the Bible has to say about them. All right. Thank you very much.